Testing.
That's a new one. Consent. Continue. Okay. Connor,
Yes.
somehow I've lost the screen view of everybody.
Oh. Well, do you necessarily need to see everybody or?
We're seeing somebody's screen share.
Yes.
Hillary Kingsbury's screen share.
Oh,
We're seeing-
interesting.
Sick of the 40-minute time limit on
Right.
mine. It says Zoom here.
Yeah, I'm
So
seeing that
that
too.
needs to go away. Hillary, can you turn that off? Wherever you are?
Turn it off. Oh,
Yeah, let me see.
do it. How do you do it?
Does anyone know how to do it, that you can tell her how to get out of this?
Oh yeah, hold on.
Yeah.
I think I got it.
The
Stop
glitches.
participant sharing.
There
Is
you
that
go.
better?
Okay.
Yeah, we're back.
Okay.
Yeah, but Connor, don't forget to put it back on.
Okay, I think I just stopped it for her, but I will
Okay,
make sure
yeah.
we're
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, all you squares, if you're willing to be people, that would be really nice. You know, willing to be seen, unless you're just not wanting to be recorded. Anyway, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Daylight Savings Day Loom Zoom. The Loom Poetry in Harrisville. I just want to say how much we appreciate Toadstool Books for being our co-host and being our supporter all this time, and how indebted we are to the Harrisville Community Fund and Harrisville itself for its amazing and generous philanthropy to date. And by the way, we are eager for a grant that would sustain us for a few years of presentations. So if you or anyone you know is interested in helping, please get in touch with me. I'm Rebecca Kaiser Gibson. I started this reading series, and you can reach me at my email, which is rebeccagibson55@gmail.com. I'm going to introduce each poet in a few minutes, and they will read each for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end for conversation. Before I begin, I want to hand the microphone to the Toadstool, which is in the corner of the Toadstool, and the spokesperson for that mushroom is Connor.
Yes, that's me. I'm the mushroom. So just real briefly, Toadstool Bookshop in Keene is proud to host this event. And I'm going to put a link for the poetry collections in the chat box. So if you have any issues with that, you can feel free to reach out to us, but it's pretty self-explanatory. You should just be able to click on the link and scroll down on the page, and their books are for sale through our site. So Yeah, that's that. Thank you all.
Okay, this offering of three poets who are quite different from each other should provide a very invigorating afternoon. Both Joan Houlihan and Andrea Cohen, favorites from earlier Loom events, have new books. In fact, all three of these poets have new books. We thought you'd be interested to hear what they've taken on in their newest published work. Andrea's book, Everything, you've probably seen. I can't see me, but can you see this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Andrea's book, Everything, includes astonishingly pithy poems that leave one gasping at their condensed wisdom. Joan's new book, It Isn't a Ghost If It Lives in Your Chest, has been described accurately, I think, as arch yet tender. I find her perceptions unflinching and beautiful, beautifully crafted. It will be former poet laureate Chard deNiord's first appearance with the Loom. His latest book is In My Unknowing. Which should resonate with many of you and did for me for the sincerity of his quest. A famous contemporary poet, Carolyn Forche, has said of his work, to read these poems is to float at a holy distance over the earth. We're going alphabetically by last name, so Andrea Cohen is first. Andrea Cohen's poems and stories have appeared in the New Yorker, the Atlantic Monthly, Poetry, the Threepenny Review, Glimmer Train, the New Republic, the Hudson Review, and elsewhere. Her poetry collections with four-way books include Everything, Nightshade, Unfathoming, Furs Not Mine. Aren't those wonderful titles, by the way? Previous collections include Kentucky Derby, Long Division, and the Cartographer's Vacation. Cohen's awards include a Guggenheim Fellowship, Glimmer Train's Short Fiction Award, and several fellowships at MacDowell. She directs the Blacksmith House Poetry Series in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Andrea's poems almost invariably encase a wry wisdom extracted from life and shaped deftly through startling sonic connections which mimic, one assumes, her own agile juggling into insight. For instance, the poem in our program, which begins, now, by the way, we do a program, and if you're on our mailing list, I've sent you the program, and maybe you've opened it, and there are poems by each of the poets in the program. This poem, which is called Gratitude, begins like this. How fortunate, having fallen, to fall in with a ladder. The poem is called Gratitude and tracks the descent deep into that icy self that one often suffers before seeing an islet of light, an opening that allows one to climb out and for which one is ultimately grateful. Lots more goes into this dense but airy poem I hope she'll read. Andrea.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that kind introduction and for all that you do in tending to poets with the series along with your own poetry. And it's a pleasure to be here with Joan and Chard, who I've known since I was 21. We went to graduate school together. It was over 10 years ago, I believe. And also,
About 8.
yeah. So I think you all may want to mute yourselves if you're not muted. Yeah. And thanks also to Toadstool, because I have fond memories of being there as well. So I'm going to jump right in with some poems, and this one is called Wrecking Ball. Its offices are thin air. On days off, it still goes in. Wrecking balls are workaholics. They hang around up there. And even the idea of big sky crumbles. Desert Isle. If I have to go there, I'd like a phone book I can sit on. A chair, on a chair. I'm going to start again, sorry. Desert Isle. Desert Isle. If I have to go there, I'd like a phone book I can sit on a chair. I'd like to believe I'm a child someone comes back for. And the beauty of having a largely mature audience is that many of you remember sitting on phone books. And those of you who don't remember it, you can ask an octogenarian to tell you what that means. This is called Everything. Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt, Kurt Vonnegut said. Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt, the girl slurred to the artist at the tattoo parlor. The word made flesh isn't fictional. It's beautiful. It hurts. After. After the accident, we had the phrase, after the accident. Also this, before the accident. We had a drawer marked before and after and before happenings, we'd add atrocities and incidents. And the wild asters, someone before and after, keeps leaving. Craft talk. I paint small birds, so when they fly off, their loss might seem like less. Fellow traveler. She went everywhere with an empty suitcase. You never know when you'll need to leave swiftly with nothing. And I'll tell you where that poem comes from. My friend Jean, she had a friend who had a Shar-Pei, I believe, who was somewhat aggressive. But they discovered that if somebody came with a suitcase, the dog would think that they were staying for a while, so they must be good friends. And so the dog wouldn't bite you. So before anybody came into the house for dinner, the host would run out, hand them a suitcase, and they would walk in with a suitcase. You cannot make these things up, you know? And so Rebecca, I'm going to read that poem, Gratitude. Thank you for that. This is after Agnes Martin. How fortunate having fallen to fall in with the ladder made of light. How inviting ideas are, climbing into bigger, into better bright. I tried and tried, but couldn't on two rungs hold fast. Panicked I was, until recalling the alpinist slipped inside a crevasse, a man who frostbit, exhausted, unable to climb up, willed himself to slip down more. One goes sometimes that deep into an icy self and finds therein an islet of light, an opening, and ghost-like from some ancient glacier stumbles. Self-portrait with eraser. I drew the eraser first because I knew it better than I knew myself, and because it had been around the block before me, and because it would, after having its way with me, rub up against everything I'd ever loved. Shiva. Evenings we sit in the living room together. Friday, I take my mother's slot, noon, at the beauty salon. Ruth, who for 40 years washed her hair, washes mine. We're all in the desert together. Your mother liked the water cold, Ruth says. News to me. From 1,000 mouths our dead assemble. Registry. They asked for what they'd need. 1 cup and 1 plate. One day whose stunt double would be night, and 2 miner's lights for when each was lost to the other. So that was written for my best friend from junior high and high school. Is written for her daughter, her oldest daughter, and groom, because they registered for 1 miner's light in their registry, and I thought, well, that's strange. I think they need 2. It turns out they already had 1, but so that's where that poem came from. And I have a cousin getting married, and I decided to. I was shocked that they had no books by Neruda on their registry, and I decided they needed some love and despair. And I imagine everybody will be getting them those books, but I'm getting them that too. Yeah. This is called Love. Love. It's an extreme sport, like indoor beekeeping. Seaside. Before the day at the beach, we scouted out the day at the beach, because nothing happens without planning, because we had to plant the sand and the idea of happiness. We had to haul in the water. All our pleasures were forays into wilds, were carry in and out, like our bodies, which glistened and were gone. And let's see. I'm just, I think these are all from this book, Everything. And then I think what I'm going to do is maybe read 1 or 2 more from this, then a couple newer poems. This is called Bearer, Bearer. It's a hard word to say, bearer. We raised the flag from half to full mast, and someone had to ask what didn't happen. After the end. Listen, there were other ends, other reckonings. There were other one-size boots, one kick fits all. There were other dark days no night could mirror. Hear me out, if someone above the rubble can. That was a poem written after an election about, I guess it was 5 years ago, yeah, in the morning. And yeah, so that's that. And I'm just going to read a few other poems. Hold on, let's see. Yeah. This is called Historical Register. This is the house where we did not, and this, and this. The list is very, very. It is what we call extensive. The register with which I will lead the tour will be loud and measured. I've packed a lunch. I've hired a bus. It's just the two of us. Come, sit closer. Dinosaurs in my head. How did they get there? They heard the word extinction, and being wise creatures decided to hide where fire and ice, where time couldn't find them. Snake handler. At last, I understand what I was afraid of. Looking down at my two hands, having nothing else to be afraid of. And I'm going to read one more poem. This one's a little longer, although of course anything is longer than pretty much all of my poems. So thank you. And this is called Wallet. John Bronzina, I think you could save me. You have green eyes and have completed your training for CPR for children and adults. John, I am in the latter category, and though my breathing is fine now, things change rapidly. You know this because you have a card for emergency roadside service. John, it is expired. You have a dental appointment in 6 days. Don't miss it. You have credit cards and debit cards, and what you do at the Lemming Emporium is your business. But tell me, what were you doing when you lost that wallet? When I found it, I'd stopped my car on Ocean View to look at a house being built on stilts. It's behind a fence that says, "Keep out." There's a pile of beer cans there, and I wonder if you had something to do with that. Maybe you sat back under the scrub pines getting drunk with friends or on your own. Maybe you were imagining you lived there, that you'd gotten locked out and were waiting for your wife or your boyfriend or both of them to let you in. That's what life is, John. People opening. You know this. You live in Connecticut. You know the president and CEO of the Invisible Bridge Corporation. His card is in your wallet. Maybe you applied for a job there. I had a job once at the Invisible Fireworks Company, but they let me go. Or more accurately, I preferred the short-term pain of leaving to the long-term injury of staying in one place. What are your goals, John Bronzina? Do you think about how you feel when you get where you're headed? I never think about a place until I've left it. Things take time, John. You'll come to understand that. You have a birthday coming up. You'll be 25. In your driver's license, you're trying to smile. You're an organ donor. Parts of you may one day spill into others the way your wallet tumbled from you, the way your cards and badges and cash flew into the bazaar of salt air and seagrasses, where there's nothing to buy or sell, just another trespasser in soft sand struggling for what we sometimes, where I come from, call purchase. Thanks.
Yes, clapping is happening. That was elegant. Thank you, Andrea. Chard deNiord is the author of 6 books of poetry, his most recent, In My Unknowing. He is also the author of 2 books of interviews with eminent American poets, I Would Lie to You If I Could, and Sad Friends, Drowned Lovers. deNiord was the 8th Poet Laureate of Vermont from 2016 to 2019. He is co-founder of the New England College MFA program in poetry. He serves as board member. Whoops, sorry. Yikes. Board member of the Sundog Poetry Center in Vermont and is the essay editor at Plume Poetry Journal. Chard lives in Westminster West, Vermont with his wife, Liz, who seems to be on the screen there. His new collection of poetry, In My Unknowing, Chard explores the paradoxical nature of unknowing. He is in profound contemplation of the inexplicable reconciliation of flesh and spirit. The music in the pit below the stage I call my emptiness, as he says in a poem called Vesper. The music in the pit below the stage I call my emptiness. The fullness of that emptiness is encountered in despair, detachment, and finally, as in the poem printed in our program, Jefferson's Bath, in transcendence into essence. Here are a few lines from that. The dropping off into the warmth of a vast, clear sea in which we swim and fly and swim without our bodies. Chard.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for all the work you've done in putting this together and the reading series in general. I'm really honored to be here to read with Joan and Andrea this evening. I'm going to read a few poems from this new book, In My Unknowing, and then a few other newer poems, and leave it at that. I think I'll actually start with this titled poem from In My Unknowing. I was going to read it last, but I think it'd be best to start with your unknowing at the beginning. In my unknowing, I was driving through the fields of heaven when I realized I was still on earth, because earth was all I had ever known of heaven, and no other place would do for living forever. I had grown beyond belief from seeing that everything I felt had sprung from lives I'd already lived, so that I could feel the way I did, which was so much I had no idea where to begin. The crawling, the slithering, the leaping, the flying, the dying. If you had been there with me in the passenger seat and asked me about the newt or flea or pachyderm, I would have told you everything I knew, which was a frightening amount. And not only that, but just how much I love them all. Those heavenly beings, the serpent, the lion, the mosquito, the hawk, the antelope, the worm, and not only beings, but stones as well. Each particular thing so mysterious in my unknowing. I knew I was living forever. I knew the fields through which I was driving were the fields of heaven, in which I was tasting and seeing and tasting. I see that my friends Michelle Burgess and Bill Kelly are here. They're two terrific book artists who live in Saxons River now, Vermont, but San Diego also, where they have their studio on the West Coast, and have been making artist books throughout their careers. And they've made a book about a poem of mine called How and Where Blood Was Made. So I'd like to read this poem in honor of them here tonight. In a sea, beneath a sea without a name, where waters gathered to a clarity, and was also sorrow, there in the darkness that thickened in a dream at the center of nothing, a scarlet serum formed with hypostatic stuff in a centrifuge of gelid currents that flowed in time with the moon, back and forth until the mere idea of things themselves suggested bodies, and they were formed as germs at first before becoming flies and worms and flesh, never mind the eons that turned seconds in retrospect inside the heads of those whose brains were seeds for minds, whose thoughts progressed in a garden where innocence died and beauty was born. Salt, sorrow, lust, stars betrayed, difference, depth, grief, violence, awe, trust, charge, order, rage, chaos, sky, fear, gush, life, stain, sea, death, flooded their hearts that hardened to stone at the taste of it. I live here in Vermont where folks heat by wood a lot, and it's not a great idea anymore to do that because of the pollution of the smoke here. So I cut a lot of wood, and I follow the lumber business a little bit. So I'm going to read a poem called "The Loggers," and it's a poem about just the devastation that's taking place around the world as far as deforestation and these mammoth machines that cut down the trees. They're called tiger cats, and they do 3 jobs in one. They cut the tree down, they buck it up, and then they load it onto trucks. There's no such thing really anymore as chainsaws in these forests. So I decided I would try to write this threnody for the trees, the loggers. The loggers move from tree to tree in the thrill of felling, feeling the sky. Let me start over, sorry. The loggers move from tree to tree in the thrill of felling, feeling the sky inside their eyes as the canopies open onto forever, and the blue, blue hue of heavens croons a song called Nothing, called Everything, as the chorus of foliage soughs along beneath the noise of Brobdingnagian saws at the necks of oaks, pines, palmitos, capucs, baobabs, ashes, palms, ipe, teak, redwoods, locusts, walnuts, mahoganies, birches, hickories, beeches, cedars, spruces, hemlocks, cherries, and firs, for a reason they can't explain other than to say, we're following a longing to raise the trees we love, and because they're there is all, with a cost we can't resist to tear the sky. And also, dare we say, the supralapsarian saw, because we can, which sounds depraved, we know, but echoes as a call that lures us into the oldest groves where the hermit thrush incants a song that grows as an oral seed inside the ear, inside our ears. Oh, holy, holy, purity, purity, sweetly, sweetly. And the chickadees stutter upbraids in vain. There's something deeply wrong beneath that has swelled to a progress that is no less than the clear-cut forests that are void of any hawthorn effect, which might have disabused you of the fact that a tree amounts to only a stick on the scale of your hearts. When you've felled so many, you have no notion of the loss you've wrought because you've thought from the start that the genius of saws, skidders and splitters and trucks permitted you license to do as you wish, which you have in fact because it's your job, felling trees in heaven's theater, and the industry demands it, and you're good at it, God damn it. And it's thrilling besides to watch them fall so slowly across the sky and onto the ground where they shake the earth itself like the word that fell at the start. And because the music of cracks, crashes, and thuds has drugged your blood with a thirst to drink the sky with your already loaded eyes in the din of Husqvarnas, Poulins, Steels, and Tiger Cats. This next poem is also about the woods. It was inspired by hawthorns. I've never read this story, so I mean this poem. This is kind of a story. So I'm a little curious to hear how it sounds in my study here and online. It's called "What Holds Them Together," and it's inspired by actually by Young Goodman Brown, Hawthorne's famous story, Young Goodman Brown, and there's a little epigraph from the Scarlet Letter, actually, not Young Goodman Brown, but it's the similar theme. This morbid meddling of conscience with the immaterial matter betokened it is to be feared no genuine and steadfast patience, but something doubtful, something that might be deeply wrong beneath. What holds them together? A man called to her at night in her husband's dream, a stranger who danced with her in the forest, then lay with her on a bed of leaves and moss. A lover her husband conjured in a dream that reoccurred throughout his life. He'd shake it off on waking, then go to work in the same deep woods he had dreamed of her the night before, and continue felling the giant oaks where he'd left off. Each tree he cut shook the earth, inflaming his heart with his dream of the man and her in a tight embrace on the forest floor, although he had no proof she'd been with him in the way he had dreamed. Who was this man who loved to dance with her beneath the trees, he wondered, this holy other who sent her home before he woke to find her there so sweetly asleep beside him? He felt compelled to rise and dress for another day of felling trees, to sharpen his chain and mix the oil. What did he know about his wife and that he could tell the long dead oak in the yard out front? That he was blessed with a job he loved so much, he was willing to risk his life? That the way the tops of the trees swept the sky as they swayed, then fell, reminded him of the way she moved inside her dress? That the perfume of her breath made him as high as the pines and oaks? That she smelled as sweet as the phloem inside the fresh-cut oak? That he was lost in it, the dream that reoccurred and therefore cursed? He tried to believe there was no end to trees, which gave him hope. Belief is the tree too large to cut, she told him in vain with a kiss when he left for work, his faithful wife, his falling leaf. This poem is about a recovery that my wife fortunately experienced after a long bout with breast cancer, chemo, all of that stuff. So it's called Then There, and it's in this new book, In My Unknowing. This spring we planted again, turned the earth and pushed the seeds into the ground with our thumbs just deep enough, then covered them with the compost loam that we had cooked throughout the winter. Then there, buried in the loam, your auburn hair, strands and clumps in which you had put in the can when it was falling out in your hands. I threw it on the lawn where it glistened in the grass. Look, I said, the ground has sprouted your hair. So poetic, dear, you said. The grass can't have it all, I said. We need it too, as a souvenir. Let's leave it there, but take some too, which we did, only to notice that the hair we left in the grass was gone the following day. The wind has donned your hair, I said, at which you laughed and then agreed, since I had reached so far beyond the pale and was reaching still. It needed it for what, I asked. The clouds, sunsets, the air. But then I saw it again a few weeks later in a spruce at the edge of the yard. Those auburn strands entwined around some straw in a nest with 4 blue eggs, and the mother watching from above with small black eyes that burned right through from the other side. I'll just read a few more here. There's I grew up as a doctor's son. I think Andrea did too. Am I correct about that, Andrea? Anyway, when you're a child, usually doctors want their children to become doctors, and my father did too. So he used to take me to the hospital quite a bit to watch operations when I was only like 12, 13, which was a little young. But one of the operations that, it wasn't really an operation, it was a procedure he wanted me to watch, was a bronchoscopy. You know, when the doctor inserts a tube into the patient's lungs. He used to do this when the patients were awake. He was very good at it. Now, it wasn't painful, but it was tough to watch. So I watched this when I was that age, 12 or 13, and wrote this fairly recently about that experience. I'll read this, and then I think maybe one or two at the most more. Bronchoscopy. My father wanted me to see what he did for a living with the hope that I'd grow up to do the same, which was to operate on people while they lay sleeping in the dreamless dark of anesthesia. So one day when I was 12, he took me to Clifton Forge, where he worked as the company surgeon for the C&O Railroad, and asked me to peer down into the lung of an elderly engineer through a bronchial scope that he had threaded through his trachea and was maneuvering around his upper and lower lobes. He asked me to step on a stool that he had placed beside the engineer seated below on a similar stool as he held the shiny tool like a sword in both his hands, and asked me to take a look. So I did, without knowing what to say except, okay. Now look down there like I just did, he said, which I did with one eye closed while spying with the other the vast reticulate labyrinth of a speckled lung and its sepia lining of pleura. The scope was lit by a tiny bulb that pierced the darkness of his insides. What I would later come to call the Newman Sackus when I had grown and come to see the seat of breath as the spirit's home. And the more I looked, the more a darkness rose despite the light at the end of the tube, since I felt sure that I was spying the end of this man's life in the specter of a shade that entered my eye. It was then, in only a moment of my gazing away, that I saw the beam of the instrument's lens, the brilliant lamp of an engine barreling down on me with more than 100 cars behind it full of coal, and this very psychopomp at his window and controls waving at me, and the din of his train on its hundreds of wheels shaking the trees and sleepers, shining the tracks in squeals, and the whistle too piercing my ears as it rose to the clouds where it disappeared into the sky's cerulean blue, which was when, without any warning or signal from my father to move my head away from the scope, the engineer coughed a ghastly cough, trembling as he did from his shoulders down, propelling a wad of phlegm into my eye. My father chuckled like a god, then joked, "Welcome to medicine, son," as I fell back into the arms of the nurse behind me, who said, "You got an eyeful there, young man," then wiped it off. The holy sputum, my father reported the following week, when word came back from the lab, had tested positive for cancer cells, but it remained, that phlegm, as a film in my eye that's thickened with age to a strong, clear lens for seeing straight through the scope of life to the various desultory, inevitable ends of everyone I meet. I'll read these two more. This is called The Lack. And I don't think I could have written this poem, even 5 years ago, but so here it is. And then I'll end with one other. The Lack. So I am feckless, I admit, for I was born without sufficient feck, which is why I take a supplement of it, along with all my other pills and stuff, although it's never quite enough. So I digress as a way to curse my dearth of feck, as if a prolegomenon of plot could plug the drain of my so leaky self, and then and afterward as well. But no, not yet. I had a dream last night in which I was enough, blessed with a speck that tipped the scale to bliss, but lo, I couldn't sleep for long and woke to what I felt was far too much and missed my old ironic want. So I confess, feck is more, except when it is less. Let's see, just one more here. This is a poem I wrote for it's an actual title poem of this new book. I stand beneath the mountain with an illiterate heart. And the University of Vermont held this wonderful conference a couple of years ago called The Feverish World. Bruno Latour was there. It was a wonderful time. And I had this terrifying job of opening this conference or this festival. And so I wrote this poem for it as a kind of kickoff for this festival. It wasn't really a festival. It was more of just an international conference. And I called it right away, I stand beneath the mountain with an illiterate heart. I stand beneath the mountain with an illiterate heart and imagine the clouds and angels singing a silent song that we can hear somehow because it's also echoing inside us where a valley I call my heart and mind is one, listens and listens, but never fully understands, where my eyes also hear and hear from seeing and seeing, but never fully see. The earth is crying. I stand beneath the mountain with an illiterate heart and listen to the hermit thrush I cannot see in the brush. I call back to him in my human voice that makes no sense beyond my hum. I believe in the power of song more than words to tell the truth in a musical code that pierces the woods. I stand beneath the mountain with an illiterate heart and watch the animals and plants disappear. They are being sucked through a hole in the sky. I'm waiting to go. A year is a day. The reel to reel is wailing. I stand beneath the mountain with an illiterate heart, whose alphabet I can never know, but only marvel at. A voice cries out from the mountain summit, lie down again before the lords of the earth and let them creep all over you. Let just one of them speak for all the others the way they do. When I say I can't, she whispers back, you must just listen to the voice inside the song of every animal, plant, and stone. It's the chorus called beauty. It's the list we were born to keep adding to. No one who fails to see himself in a fox or fly or ant can speak for another, although his voice may loom like thunder in a crowded hall, although he may charm a throng with empty words, although he may think the shadows are real on the wall. I stand beneath the mountain with an illiterate heart and squeak, then howl in response to a toad called Golden, to a parakeet called Carolina, to a tiger called Tasmanian. Each letter of earth is so inscrutable, I know I'm living forever when I behold them. I must do what I must to save them. Today is tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Chard.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Joan Houlihan is the author of 6 books of poetry. Most recently, It Isn't a Ghost If It Lives in Your Chest. Previous books are Shadow Feast, I, The Us, The Mending Worm, and Handheld Executions. She's a contributing critic for the Contemporary Poetry Review and the author of a series of essays on contemporary American poetry. She's taught at Columbia University and Emerson College and currently teaches in the Lesley University Low Residency MFA program. She is also professor of the practice in poetry at Clark University in Worcester. Houlihan is founder and director of the Coleraine Poetry Manuscript Conference. In her 6th collection of lyric poems, It Isn't a Ghost If It Lives in Your Chest, I just like saying that title over and over again. Houlihan is remarkable in her unerring ability to register a sensate, almost pre-verbal level of awareness in language. It's pre-verbal, but it's in language. I don't know how she does that exactly. Her enactment of the physical perspective of childhood in the poem I'm about to quote from, in The Cartwheel, is an example of this ability. This is just a few lines from that. Arms and legs. I am spokes on a lawn, fresh cut. Which way am I turning? Which way am I facing? Ground, sky, ground. The nouns are stark, the links between them understood by us, the discrepancy between them, their separateness evoking that early, vivid experience of childhood. I think she is a master of deep personification. That is, she's able to evoke sensation from deep inside the character from whose perspective she's writing. This is beyond the well-known writing advice, show, don't tell. This is more like be, don't point at. Joan.
Wow, thank you, Rebecca. And thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm so thrilled to read with you, Chard and Andrea. It's great. Sorry we're not in Harrisville, which is this great little church. It's an experience. Maybe we'll have it someday. Maybe we'll go out again. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm going to do a share screen because I've realized that this is something I can do with this technology. And I've always wanted the work to be present. And sometimes I give handouts at readings for that reason, because I feel like the words kind of go by in the air. And I like the page so much. So I'm going to share this screen with you and you'll be able to read along with me, like in kindergarten, I guess, when we read along with the teacher. So the first few poems are mother poems. Yeah, so I actually have that poem, The Cartwheel, here, and I'll read that too. The axe and hammer which come to be mother. Loud as the dark that comes over you, to feed you, she forages here. Twigs break. She is near the old parts of earth, takes from its pressed down matter and makes an edible wafer. When the churches died out, she stayed. Her language busted with wrath. Small mottles took hold of her skin. Her body a warthog, she wobbled. Truth in one hand, go to hell in the other. She brandished the axe of justice as she floated over the stumps. She brandished the hammer of damn it as we cowered in our beds. Her will, made of pitch, can't be read. Her fostering. Mother is my thought. She is leaf, then blue, then all the blues together, high. I'm her eye. She cooks me honey, she cooks me milk. She will always know me by the pad of my feet in morning, by the tip of my nose at noon, by the tap, tap, tap of my cane at night. A species of mother. So there are a couple of references here, kind of like the sitting on the phone book. Some people won't get them because they're not old enough, but these are from 40s movies, which I used to love to watch with her. And so Queen for a Day was a game show where women got up and talked about the sadnesses in their lives. And if it was sad enough, they might win a washing machine or some other appliance to help them in the house. Queen for a Day. Widmark is a reference to Richard Widmark, a really evil seeming actor. He played very evil characters and he was my mother's favorite actor. Cagney references to James Cagney, the gangster, the short gangster. A species of mother. Crooked seams and a garter belt. Daytime TV and a Whitman sampler. Queen for a Day with a twist. She held us fixed in the sneer of Widmark, his glee in pitching a wheelchair down the stairs. Cagney shoving a half grapefruit into a woman's face. We kept quiet, nurtured ourselves on M&Ms, and told each other the story of a forest where mothers left children in the care of a tender witch. This was just read from The Cartwheel. The sun has gone in. The world is feeding. Cooing dove, cooing owl. In the cooling light, I am strange to them. Every night I am carried to bed, light as unbaled hay. Every day at the root of the elm, my child seat waits in weeds. Chokewort, black mouth, bristle burr. Cloud bales load to the sky. Arms and legs, I am spokes on a lawn, fresh cut. Which way am I turning? Which way am I facing? Ground, sky, ground. These next few poems are concerned with the environment and with animals. So ecological poems, I would say, eco poems, maybe. Topologically yours. This ground is heaving graves. What's underfoot has business here, but the whole landscape looks like trash. A body speaks to you from behind. I'm a bitter kind of happy. Bodies have feelings too. In its own head, it tried to be kind. Now it misses being killed. Soon you won't have any land, so storm over this one with long strides. Go higher. Echoes around the hills never stop. Take a lesson from that. No one can hear you. I hemorrhaged like a rose, fold after fold. Here comes another sunset. Don't lose your eyes to it. I discovered that cows could be happy only recently, and that it was very exciting for me to see them. YouTube teaches me a lot. And they showed cows coming out to pasture after being in the barn for a winter, and they were happy. They were jumping, and I thought, wow, I never really related to cows. It was always about horses when I was a girl. But cows are great. Blind trust in the nod of a cow, stiff-legged, as she leaps in the paddock, drops to her knees, then back to roll on new grass. The large eye caresses yours. She smells you as you lead her through the shaded field. Hooded and without guile, follows you to the chute. You are the ignorance she lives through, the heavy blade she hears sliding into the grooves. The secret brutalities will make patties from that on your behalf, a human fraternity carved out of a hung carcass. Another animal poem, what the bird poem. My bird, myself. Dwarf plants, brittle green, a premature llama, a white giraffe, splashed clean, a pouter pigeon with an inflatable crop. These are the limit of my estate. The first pouter came out as a double tail made from the ancient rock pigeon, an experiment that changed its cry 5 times. It was a private study. Privacy causes asylums, doesn't it? My doctor's listening, performed with a stethoscope, pins me to meaning I didn't mean. An academic reeking of the study. I don't deserve him. He speaks and I no longer listen. My powder rests on a spliced tree, scars of different ages, giving it all the history it needs. Trigger warning. Kind of a joke. Both senses. Trigger warning. On what were said to be tarpaulins, by campsite, our fish pan empty, god-awful stings on our fronts and backs, appendages ending in fingers, all that. It brings forth the time of my shock. We rummaged our rucksacks for crumbs in the cracks of our leather linings. Some of us lifted guns. Nature, it's here for us. The squirrel bit, the bird bit, and bear. Loaded for you, they rise big from a bush, typically drag you around, then stuff you under a log. A meal to come back to, enjoy. 9/10 of the law and all that. I waited for hours playing dead, then used my fingers to dig my way out. The dirt's still under my nails. So these next few poems are straight out persona poems. Rebecca referred to persona, which I use quite a lot because I don't know who I am, really. I am a Switzerland. Father created an Alp for me. He called it Paterhorn. It came out in the shape of a sugar cone, the top silvery white. Am I an heiress? Yes. To his hymn book with gilt edge, to his Bibles pressed to death pansies and moth, to these brass cufflinks and trouser hangers, to this sprung Eros in my damask. What pink flesh you have, he'd observe, as he stuffed an apple into a pig head and served it with both eyes open. He worked his own eyes from behind, a large contraption moving room to room, made like an icon by looking. Born into his country, I master him. My eyes, hands, and ears triumph. In winter, my Alp is powdered with father, his head a silvery cloud. Socrates, yeah, him too. Education. Out and alone, I wander and wonder, where do shadows go? Father's gigantic blocks the sun. He moves to let it blind me. Know thyself, know thyself. I have been paralyzed by this. I once spoke thus and such, taught the young to examine their lives. I told them their gods were dirty. Now I am smaller and make figures on the wall. Cow nodding, floppy turkey, birdie on a branch. Little Plato is my rabbit. He nibbles on my scrolls. This title is taken from another 40s movie. That's the title. A movie starring Paul Muni, I believe, who escaped from a chain gang, oddly enough. I'm a fugitive from a chain gang. Blinded by freedom and without morals, unable to follow orders, family a partially digested memory, I have left the problem known as people. The past comes on as illness. How we twisted together, clanked ankles and smelled like heat. Depraved, rubbing sand in the palms of our hands. From above, our line writhed like de Havilland's snake pit. Now I have become my own prisoner, drinking from a bowl of river water, playing with the head of an axe. Where does kindness come from? Not here. Yeah, so there's another movie reference there. De Havilland, Olivia de Havilland was played character named Virginia in the movie The Snake Pit, which was quite an expose for its time of what goes on in a mental institution. And the Snake Pit name came from the old practice of throwing a mentally ill person into a snake pit to scare out of him what had gotten into him. And in the movie, she sees the shadows of the mental patients walking along on the walls and sees them as snakes, and sees herself in the snake pit. Hagiography is loosely based on Hildegard of Bingen's life. Hagiography. I belong to a room on the slope of an Alp, in a house for people down at the heels. Mother mends linen for the hires up, the ones in chalets with curly eaves, balconies whipped into peaks. They look down on us through windows latticed like pies. At 3, I saw the shade of living light. At 8, I was enclosed as an oblate. The universe is an egg, I said, and the nuns promoted me. When I refused to tell what I heard from God, I was sent an illness that paralyzed my limbs. My ceiling is pierced with holes. They used a trephine. Searchlights pour through all night. Who are they looking for? My trundle bed wheels to the top of the stairs. Without seeing anyone, I drink the last from a cup, keep mother's needle inside my sleeve. I never hurt anyone. This is why they sainted me. This is a line from the title, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? A Depression era song that I love. It's also sometimes Buddy, Can You Spare a Dime? I was the kid with the drum. The rivets we pounded went in solid, and we built a tower of brick and lime, sat on the beams and ate our lunches, legs swinging over the city. Torches high, we walked the rails, hammered in spikes, made the steel sing, and it sang on the tracks that take us now to side yards and small pointed fires. No sky before us, no sky behind. We ride knees up in the boxcar dark, stained with sweat from the tracks, stained with earth from the fields, the marvelous harvest staunched. Why should I now be standing in line, hands in the shape of a bowl? Every day goes, and I want to go too, with that huge, still harvest of men. This poem is in the voice of a dear friend who was known by many of you, Lucy Brock Broido. We were very close. I've known her for 30 years, and her death was a shock, as everyone who knows her feels. The Girl I Left Behind Me is the name of a painting by Eastman Johnson, that the image of which she would have used for her last book. But now, of course, that will not be done. But there will be a new and collected, or a collected that her friend Tim Donnelly is ushering through the process. The Girl I Left Behind Me. The wind, being motherless, wraps the tree, troubles the window a little. My kittens circle, crouch, leap, couch to counter and back. And in the detritus of me, box to tiniest box, I unpack the single pussy willow, one paw tissued. In that velvet dark I moved through, lit low in spite of others, heat enough for me, enough for others to refrain from. I rub the amber leaf light from my last Christmas tree, take to the tub and marble surround to worship the waters, take to the bed heaped high and deep, my appetite caged and cruelly tamed. Who will make me safe, conspire in the lie of beauty, the lie of the body unbreached? In the rush of tissue, new boots laced to my pace, cincture of suede at my waist and my hair, my God, the waves of shook copper, shining a girl's will. How far I've come. And how do you like your hyacinth girl, the gone as smoke of me now? This is the last poem I'll read. Thank you everyone for listening. Sunset, fir tree, star. Sunset flows north. A river flows under its shell. I left the house to get lost, to make the tree visible. I put out limbs to illuminate the inside of my body. Why should I care what goes away? The star which is out of this world flourishes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and thank you, Rebecca and Andrea and Chard. Great afternoon. Great way to spend an afternoon.
Um, oh, I'm live, aren't I?
You are.
There don't seem to be any questions that I see on the chat. If anyone would like to say something, just unmute yourself and move your hand around and we'll recognize you. Last time I did this, I didn't wait long enough for people to speak, so I'll wait another minute. Okay, I guess we're kind of a little over the time that we thought we were going to be, but I can't see the poets on my screen, but you're there somewhere, I know.
I
Let
see a
me-
question.
Do you?
Andrea.
Okay,
Yeah,
Go
about a
ahead. What
poem.
is
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is a question?
I'm
from
curious
Meg?
about how a poem starts, says Rebecca Upjohn. Imagery, words, idea. Would any of you like to take that?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, that's the answer to the question. I would say
All of
probably all of the above.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And this is
Andrea, you have a question, Andrea?
I do.
with the
Yeah.
short poems, says Jonathan Eibel to everyone. Do they start longer and get cut down? What's the process? Andrea?
Well, they very often happen as they did today in the swimming pool. They kind of happen all at once. So this is the one from today in the swimming pool. Stolen hours. You always pay for them. So, it's really just thinking of a phrase and then kind of seeing where my mind goes with it, and sometimes playing with it a bit. But no, they usually are very, very concise things to begin with. Yeah.
So they come whole like that?
Yes, pretty much. Yeah.
Interesting.
Andrea, do you write in the pool?
I do, but in my head.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. So when I'm walking my dog or running or swimming, that's very often when those little poems come. Yeah.
And you remember them pretty well. Yeah.
Well, 4 words, I'm pretty good so far. I can remember 4 words.
They're more than that sometimes.
Yeah.
How would each of you other two answer that question?
What's the other,
Oh.
what's the question exactly?
Let me read it to you again.
Yeah.
Do your poems start longer and get cut down, or in your cases, do they start shorter and get expanded? Or how does the whatever this motion is happen for you?
Both ways, I think. More on the cut down side, though. Yeah. Yeah, I have to restrain myself sometimes from doing that. As I really like the way things happen without connections, without overt connections. So I tend to kind of go all out on the cut down side, but not as all out as Andrea. But Andrea's not really cutting down. She's presented with something whole, which is really,
Right.
yeah.
And what about you, Chard?
Well, they often start on like slips of like dry cleaning slips, in the car or bills sometimes, and then I have to go home and figure out what I've written on these pieces of paper, and then I sometimes then move to like pads like this where I just write a lot, and then boil them down to much shorter poems, and let's just let them sit in my office or my study here for a long time, and then go back to them and see if there's something there that I still want to elaborate or to continue or think about. And often, yeah, I will lose them, but that's pretty much how it happens. I'll be also just a little bit like Joan, well, Andrea. It's, I'm just out in the woods or the yard and think of something. If I don't write it down pretty quickly, it's gone. So it reminds me of Ruth Stone, who was a good friend of mine, and I did several interviews with her and spent the last year or two with visiting her in Ripton, and she always used to say, it's a famous story she tells, that she used to hear her poems coming to her from across the universe like a train, and and if she didn't run inside and write them down on something, on a slip of paper, like this, she says they'd be gone, and they say, I lost some of my best poems that way. So I feel the same way. They evanesce so quickly if you don't write at least a line or two. I'm very envious of Andrea writing these short poems like that. They just seem to be born whole, Andrea. It's amazing.
Yeah, but Chard, like you should see the ones that got away.
Oh, well, so you have the same experience? Yeah.
Well, I have, I'm sure like everybody else, I have ways of keeping in my head like sets of words.
Yeah.
So each word will refer to an idea. So I might be out for a walk and come home with 6 words. And,
Yeah.
And then I know
your poems are so tight and witty, Andrea. I mean, and they just turn on, on just the smallest point sometimes. So with such great velocity. I wonder if they exist in your head like that before you actually get them down.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
As she said, there's one more question. This is from Anne Van Buren about ekphrastic, which is poems written in reference in some way to an artwork. Loved your poem, Joan, based on the Eastman Johnson painting. Do you often write to artwork? This question could apply to the other readers as well.
That's a really interesting question because that poem is not written to a painting. It's written in the voice of a dear friend, Lucy Brock-Bordeaux, who wanted that painting for the cover of her next book. So it's really not ekphrastic, officially, I would say. It's not really written to that painting, although there's something in that painting for sure that's like Lucy, which is why she was attracted to it. But ekphrastic poems in general don't interest me. And in fact, I started writing ekphrastic poems based on paintings I've never seen. So I just take the title and write a poem around that. And then sometimes I'd look at the artwork and see if there's any connection. Sometimes there is, but I don't like the one-to-one kind of reporting that goes on with, I'm writing a poem about this, and oh yeah, there's the apple and there's the bowl and it's blue, and I'd rather look at the painting.
That's a perfectly Joan answer. Either of you want to comment on that, Andrea?
I love looking. I love going to museums and looking at things, and it's often it can spark something, and it's never a one-to-one kind of correspondence that you were mentioning for me, Joan. It's more a sort of stepping off place.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty true for me also. My wife's a painter, and she used to be a figurative painter primarily, but now she's an abstract painter and does beautiful paintings like this. And I don't write about her poems. We collaborated on a project a couple of years ago called Return His Ticket, which was about leaving for work, forgetting something, and then having to come back and discovering that the landscape had just changed because I was in a hurry, and just that hurry made me see things anew. And then she painted this beautiful. So I think it works the opposite way for me. For my wife then writes these paintings about my some of my experiences, but I've I've never really written ekphrastically. Is that the correct adverb for ekphrastic? But at the same time, I like Andrea, I love going to museums and just so maybe it's unconscious. I think that's probably the best way I could answer that.
Well, thank you all for being here. This is wonderful. We're going to have a surprise reading in April, and then in the summer we'll have another favorite poem reading, and you can learn about that if you want to by looking at our website. And again, if you want to be on the mailing list and you aren't, just write to me, Rebecca Gibson 55@gmail.com. Okay. Goodbye. Have a
Bye-bye.
great-
Thank
That's
you.
a-
Bye,
next
thank
week.
you so
Thank you,
much.
Rebecca.
Bye.
Thank you, Connor.
Thank you.